Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you are refreshed with some coffee or other light beverages. We're now going to be convening the second expert panel on technological innovation and cooperation for resilient infrastructure. This panel is organized by Ewha Womans University. I am the Dean of the Graduate School of International Studies at Ewha Womans University. And so I'd like to thank, first of all, our hosts, Stanford University and their sponsors, and what a delight it is to be on such a beautiful campus. It's my first time here, and I was really excited, and I've enjoyed it very much. So I'm on my best behavior so I get invited back. I'd also like to thank Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and his foundation for the tremendous leadership they have provided in this field. And of course, Chairman Zandan Chattar and his colleagues from Mongolia for the tremendous demonstration of political will and coalition building in terms of operationalizing and mobilizing the country of Mongolia to address some of these issues. Finally, I'd like to thank President Eunmi Kim and Ewha Womans University for supporting this program for the last three conferences, hosting the first two. And here today we have three departments represented. We have the Graduate School of International Studies, we have the Division of International Studies of Scranton College, and we have the Engineering Department. We have three majors represented here. We have two professors from International Relations and two professors from Development Cooperation and one professor from Environmental Engineering. So we're going to focus mainly, I think, on the Target 9A, facilitate sustainable and resilient infrastructure development in developing countries through enhanced financial, technological, and technical support to African countries, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, which is a particular interest of mine, and small island developing states, with some touching on Target 9C, the access to information and communication technology, which of course was already extensively covered in the previous panel. So I was originally going to be presenting on this panel as well, but in the interest of giving more time to my esteemed colleagues, I will speak extremely briefly about LAU-PDR, hopefully keeping it to about 2 minutes, I think. Then I will pass on to Professor Leif-Eric Easley, who's going to talk about South Korea and ASEAN geopolitics and development cooperation. He will be followed by Professor Jaehyun Jung, who will be looking at resilient infrastructures to address missing women. Then we'll have Professor Thomas Kalinowski looking at the implementation problem of SDGs and the need for domestic soft infrastructure, which he will explain. Finally, we'll have Professor Yeomin Yoon, who is Distinguished Professor in the Department of Environmental Science and Engineering, briefly mentioned yesterday by our President. He'll be looking at resilient environment for water futures. So, if I could have my LAU-PDR slides. Okay, I'm going to skip forward on these to this very interesting slide. Maps of the bombing that LAU-PDR suffered during the Vietnam War, and maps of development challenges or underdevelopment, especially because of the challenges to infrastructure and investment posed by explosive remnants of war contamination. Now, this is just a quick eyeballing of the challenges we face. As was introduced quite extensively yesterday, we do need peace in order to secure sustainable development, but also we need to focus on the challenges posed by explosive remnants of war and other post-conflict development challenges which can endure for many decades afterwards. LAU-PDR is a very interesting case study. As we saw in the previous panel, it has achieved substantial development success, and indeed substantial development success in terms of energy renewables through its mega projects, its hydroelectric dams. It's also at the heart of the move towards becoming land-linked rather than land-locked, again focusing on resilient infrastructure development. But there are lots of problems with this, especially from the perspective of human-centered development. But as I don't have time to talk about all of this, maybe this will come up in the Q&A session. I will hand over now to Professor Leif-Eric Easley for a more substantial presentation.
Thank you, Dean Howe, for that introduction and for your leadership on our panel. Thank you to the visionary leaders of championing the SDGs at this conference and beyond, the hardworking organizers of this conference, and my distinguished colleagues on this panel. It's a pleasure to be with this expert audience today. Sorry to start with bad news before sharing some good news. The bad news is that, as we have heard in previous sessions, we still have a long way to go to realize the SDGs, including that which is the focus of this session. This is in part because of geopolitical competition that hampers international coordination, sets off cycles of rivalry rather than cooperation, and reduces the effectiveness and efficiency of international organizations. But there's good news. There are cases of state and non-state actors navigating geopolitical rivalries to make progress on the SDGs. Today, I'm going to discuss the role of a proactive middle power, South Korea, and its engagement of sustainability partners in Southeast Asia. South Korea has substantially increased its ODA to about $3 billion in 2023, a 10% increase from the year prior. And its 2024 budget is scheduled for an even larger increase. In terms of strategy, the current Yoon administration has built the Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, or KASI, on top of the previous administration's New Southern Policy. Seoul is facilitating the building of sustainable and resilient infrastructure in ASEAN countries. Extensive public-private cooperation is providing effective financial and technological support, including digital partnerships to increase secure and privacy-respecting access to the internet. I've researched from a geopolitical perspective how South Korea is navigating between China's Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, and the Quad Quality Infrastructure Push and G7 Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGI, on the other hand. Allow me to highlight several projects among the hundreds that are underway, planned, or already completed. An important example of resilient infrastructure is the Temburong Bridge project in Brunei, with significant construction completed by Daelim. The 30-kilometer bridge is the longest in Southeast Asia, designed to weather natural disasters and respect local rainforests, while contributing to economic development by connecting previously isolated areas. The project is also a clear example of Korean construction plugging into China-backed infrastructure, as the other major builder was the China State Construction Engineering Corporation. With perhaps even greater impact, a light rail project, MRT-7, in Manila, led by KORail, will improve transportation safety and reduce pollution in the Philippines. This Korean contribution to infrastructure complements the US-supported Luzon Economic Corridor, connecting Manila and Subic Bay, which is a project of the G7 PGI with investment from Japan, and which demonstrates cooperation among Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, partners. Many South Korean projects support green transition and decarbonization in Southeast Asia. For example, SK has been operating a 131 megawatt solar facility. Now, for those of you who aren't into solar, that's about the scale of powering 25,000 homes, east of Saigon, in addition to rooftop solar projects. SK also operates 50 megawatt and 100 megawatt offshore wind farms west of Saigon and is working on a much larger onshore wind farm near Vietnam's border with Laos. Elsewhere, Samsung Engineering and Lotte Chemical have teamed up on a major green hydrogen and ammonia project in Malaysia. Using Sarawak's hydroelectric power generation, the project will annually produce 7,000 tons of green hydrogen, that can help fuel vehicles, for example, and 800,000 tons of green ammonia. That can be exported to make notable reductions in carbon emissions at LNG power plants. In Indonesia, Hyundai and LG have launched with local partners an EV battery plant in West Java with an estimated annual capacity to power 150,000 EVs per year. In addition to offering solutions for zero-emission vehicles, the partnership will help to responsibly develop Indonesia's critical minerals industry, which includes the world's largest nickel reserves. I should also mention how the Korea International Cooperation Agency, or KOICA, has grants, capacity building programs, and technical exchanges with Southeast Asia, including developing digital infrastructure and connectivity, e-government systems, and smart grid technologies utilizing the Internet of Things. This has facilitated Korean companies working on smart water management systems in Cambodia and smart transportation systems in Thailand. For example, intelligent traffic lights in the Thai Eastern Economic Corridor use real-time data to reduce congestion, helping make vehicle traffic more efficient and sustainable. Adjacent to Southeast Asia, South Korea is working with small island developing states in the Pacific. Seoul hosted its first summit with the leaders of the Pacific Island Forum, or PIF, in May 2023. With the threat of rising sea levels in Oceania, discussions focused on climate policies and disaster resilience projects. However, the Yoon administration also aligned its efforts with the US-led Partners in the Blue Pacific initiative, which promotes cybersecurity, pre-positioning of emergency supplies, and enhancing maritime domain awareness for sustainable fishing. South Korean infrastructure projects in the Indo-Pacific demonstrate an ability to navigate political and geopolitical tensions by contributing funding from diverse sources, including private capital, national governments, the Korean Exim Bank, and the international financial institutions as diverse as the China-led AIIB, the Japan-led ADB, and the US-led World Bank. And South Korea-ASEAN cooperation continues to expand. As seen in President Yoon's visits to the Philippines, Singapore, and Laos just this past week, Seoul makes a priority of adding projects to the pipeline, attending ASEAN meetings, and engaging Southeast Asian institutions. We can certainly debate the extent to which lessons from South Korea's policies are generalizable to other middle powers and to broader global South cases beyond Southeast Asia. But I think several potential implications are notable, and I'll conclude with three. First, middle powers can offer a third way to what are frankly undesirable paths for development cooperation. It's to nearly everyone's loss when geopolitical rivalry produces gridlock in international institutions. And the old Cold War paradigm, where rival superpowers paid to maintain spheres of influence and less developed states tried to play rivals off each other, that was very inefficient. The middle power way is to help provide options for less developed states so as to mitigate the risks of over-relying on any one country or group. Middle powers don't have the diplomatic baggage of colonialism or perceived efforts at regional hegemony. So they can bring together the resources, the technology, political will, and implement projects on the ground. South Korea's sustainability initiatives in Southeast Asia are cases in point. A second conclusion is that middle powers have good reasons for performing a facilitating role. It's not about charity. For Seoul, there are economic diversification opportunities for Korean companies in Southeast Asia. These have the added benefits of helping South Korea navigate US-China rivalry by appearing to be acting in ways simultaneously complementary to Beijing's BRI and Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy. Third, and finally, the way a middle power moves major projects forward is by upgrading and upholding international standards. That's why the SDGs remain so important, and why Blue Dot Network certification can be a useful tool in the future. There is no shortage of geopolitical rifts in the world today, but middle power facilitators can help close the global infrastructure gap, yielding broad social and economic security benefits. As we say in Korean, as in many other languages, 함께 가면 물이 간다. If you want to go far, go together. Thank you, and I look forward to discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Easley. And now we have Professor Jaehyun Jung.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for having me here today. So personally, it's been 5 years after I completed my PhD in the East Coast and coming back in States about after COVID-19. So I just realizing it's really difficult to get myself just to this time zone, and my sore throat is not going to getting better. So please understand my situation. So anyhow, so today I'm going to discuss how resilient infrastructures can help address the missing women, which is one of the egregious phenomena that can be discussed in the gender inequality, in particular in developing countries. So I think many of you have not heard of any term, the missing women. So actually, this semester, I'm teaching the gender and development course to about 25 students from all over the world, and they are mostly come from the developing countries. And I asked them, have you ever heard the term missing women? But I just realized that there are only 3 students who heard of this term. And the missing woman refers to the gender imbalance, which means a shortfall in the number of the women relative to the expected number of women due to the sex-assaultive practices, violence, or trafficking or neglect. So these missing women can be found throughout one's life cycle, even before the birth, which means if a woman realizes that she is carrying the female fetuses, then they might want to abort the current pregnancy, something like that. And even after the birth, she might want to choose, or the family might want to choose neglect or do the less investment in girls, human capital investment that resulted in premature death. So these missing women can be found throughout one's life cycle. So even childhood and the reproductive ages as a maternal mortality, and even to the old ages by the trafficking or violence also. So this term actually first introduced by Dahmer. I just said this shows how the gender inequality can be egregious, this also tells how it is important to address these important issues when we deal with the gender inequality. Okay, so So, and today I'm going to discuss how resilient infrastructure can help in mitigate the issue of the missing woman. And there are several aspects that how these resilient infrastructure can help. For example, it can improve the access of essential services by providing proper healthcare, education, and social services to the poor households. Or it can improve the safety. It can establish safe environments that includes the well-designed public spaces and transport that prevent trafficking or exploitation. So, or the resilient infrastructure or proper infrastructure can help the society to have the better or more economic opportunities. So it can provide more. It can allow women to have more economic opportunities. So today I'm going to focus on the disaster resilience, which means the women are it is known that the women are not that differently treated under normal circumstances, but this differential treatment can be very pronounced when there is a negative shocks, including disasters or negative weather shocks. So when there is a negative weather shocks or negative income shocks, and women are often more vulnerable during this crisis, which means they are likely to be under disinvestment compared to the investment to the male siblings. Or there can be the worst case scenario is that there can be the infanticide during the childhood, or there can be more likely the human trafficking or exploitation or so. So today, I'm going to present the two exemplary papers today. So the first paper is showing how the infant mortality, how the female infant mortality can increase after the natural disasters. So the first paper was written by the Ante Hughes, Jesse, and Solomon Xiang. And I realized that there are both my colleagues from my same PhD program, and the Solomon Xiang has moved from Berkeley to Stanford this semester. So I think if you get better about his kind of the climate change economics, I think it's a good person to talk in person. So this paper is a kind of the very innovative paper when this paper was written. So this paper investigates the post-disaster losses within Filipino households by exploiting the annual variation in the incidence of typhoons. And they show that there's a multiple contribution of this paper, but one of the most striking the findings they show us, they provide us is that unearned income and excessive infant mortality in the year after the typhoon exposure in the Philippines outnumbers the immediate damages and death tolls roughly 15-1. So everyone might think that the immediate impact of the negative weather events, including typhoon, might be very dramatic, but it turns out that after those negative shocks, those economic death or economic toll might be even greater to the immediate negative impacts. So surprisingly, the negative impact is not gender neutral. So this is one of the table from the paper. So when we look into that table, this shows that when the wind speed of the typhoon increases 1 meter per second, there's a showing the excess mortality per 1 million mothers. So when we look into the first column, it shows that after 1 year of the typhoon, there is about 80 more excessive infant mortality in Philippines. But it turns out that those 80 excess infant mortality is not gender neutral. When we look into the column number 5, most of the mortality comes from the female infant mortality, which means the poor household after negative shock, which is a typhoon in this case, they intentionally do less investment in the human capital investment and do the less investment in the female infants, so that resulted in greater infant mortality, particularly for the female infants. So as you see, the most out of the 80 excess infant mortality, about the 74 infant mortality is due to the female infant mortality. So you can realize that if this Filipino household were able to properly can be prepared for the negative shocks. In this case, typhoon, they will not be in kind of this situation to do this investment in the female infants. So let's move on to the second example. So this paper is actually my job market paper, which was recently published last year. So in this case, I look into how the Vietnamese household respond to the negative shocks. In this case, it's the droughts. And there's one particular setting here, so which is a social. There's a special social norm, which is some preference in Vietnam. So I investigated how abortion of the Vietnamese household and abortion in Vietnam is considered as a kind of usual contraceptive methods. So when those households consider that it is not the best time for them to have kids, then they can do abortion. So it is not an unusual contraceptive method for them. So when there is a negative shock, which is drought, then I could find that there is an increase in the abortion rates for the poor households, but those abortion is also not gender neutral. So when those families could find out they're carrying the female fetuses, then the likelihood of abortion increased right after the droughts. So I could find that affected mothers by the drought were 30% more likely to obtain abortions when they were not able to smooth their consumption. And those droughts were associated with disproportionately more abortions of the female fetuses, which exacerbate the male bias to sex ratio at birth. So this figure shows how the birth and the sex ratio birth responding to the drought shocks. So as you can see in the shaded area, so there is a shock in the dotted line, and after about 3 quarters later, I could find that there's a drop in birth, mostly due to the abortions, and that this coincides with the male bias to sex ratio in the same period of time. So for today's discussion, so I want to present one additional result, which is showing the heterogeneous impact of the drought and abortion likelihood. And when the dependent variable is abortion, I could find that if those households are located in the triple cropping regions, which means if the household can expect one more rice crop harvest, then there's actually almost no abortion happen in those provinces. And when we look into the second column, which is showing the level of the irrigation of their rice paddies, which means if those paddies are more properly irrigated, then they are less prone to the drought shocks, which resulted in the less abortion rates. So which means it shows that how important it is to have the proper infrastructure for these poor households not to fall in the tragic household choices like abortions or neglect or disinvestment in the female infants. Okay, so this is my presentation, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jung. Now we'll have Professor Thomas Kalinowski.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. It's a great pleasure for me here, and thank you very much for the invitation to the TPSD. It's my first time, actually, I'm at this event, and I'm really learning a lot. I think 2 years ago, when it was held at Ewha, I was on sabbatical, so great pleasure for me. I actually thought quite long what to present this panel on infrastructure, because my research is not really related to infrastructure, at least in the traditional sense of hard infrastructure. But more on issues of soft infrastructure, of what kind of institutions do we need to translate global goals like the SDG, but also climate goals into domestic action. And I think on the panel before, it was mentioned that we need smart leader. We have to go beyond mediocre leader. And, well, I would say I don't think we have the time to wait for smart leaders. I think we need to build institutions that can actually, and that can be run by mediocre leaders and also mediocre bureaucrats. So I think my research in this sense relates to what Francis Fukuyama yesterday called kind of implementation problem of these global goals. And I do think there are actually a lot of things to learn from the East Asian development experience, the historical experience. And I think this is one of the TPSD missions to foster this dialogue and bring in this kind of East Asian knowledge into the global discourses. In this context, actually, I want to segue into my research project that I'm currently working on, which is on the Green Climate Fund, and in particularly its private sector projects. So the GCF is the largest multilateral climate fund, and its goal is to, it's one of those institutions that plans to channel part of the effort to channel $100 billion in additional climate finance to the global south. So from the global level, $100 billion from public, but also from private sources to the domestic level of the global south. And the secretariat is based in South Korea, which is quite convenient for me. And my question was exactly that. How is that working? How is it, particularly when it comes to private projects, how do they align with the other goals of the GCF, but also the SDGs and development cooperation in general? And that is strong country ownership, making sure that the soft infrastructure, the institutions, are actually in place so that countries can use this money effectively, and how can they minimize negative effects of these financial flows. And I do think we always have to consider when we are thinking of financial flows, particularly when we're thinking about large sums of financial flows, and $100 billion, we're not reaching that yet, but we want to, and we want to have more. The COP29 will discuss how to mobilize even more money. That's a lot of money, and a lot of money can cause also a lot of problem. Can cause a lot of good, but it can also cause a lot of problem. We have seen many financial crises around the world, in East Asia, 97, 98 in the US, and then the whole world, 2008, 2009. And unfortunately, when I looked at the GCF private sector projects, I found that there's actually quite strong tension between the private sector finance mobilization and country ownership. First of all, it's quite, as we have also heard in the panel this morning, it's quite difficult actually to get private climate finance into the global south. The GCF and other institutions are falling way short. The interest, and that is, the answer is relatively simple. The private sector needs a clear business model. It needs to make money from its investment. And when it comes to climate, these business models exist only in a very narrow field, mostly renewable energy. So really 80% of that financing is actually in this very narrow field of renewable energy. But we know, of course, we need much, much more, including climate adaptation issues, where the money is actually not, is very extremely difficult to mobilize money. But there are some interesting actually examples where this is the case, but not that many. The private sector actually likes very big multi-country projects and transferring projects to new countries. And there's, again, this kind of strong tension with the country ownership, because either you have large multi-country projects, or you have projects that are owned by the individual country, that are part of the domestic development plans of these countries. So often, unfortunately, in these projects, country ownership is actually defined as or limited to the government writing a no objection letter. So they do not object to this private sector project, but it's not really part of their development plan. So I would say it's not, yeah, it's a very narrow definition of country ownership, I would say. So, yeah, what kind of institutions do we need, and why don't they? I think this was also what Francis Fukuyama was referring to yesterday. What kind of why don't institutions play a more important role in the SDGs? And that's of course probably because it becomes controversial. We can agree on the general goals, but then what kind of institution we need domestically to implement them, that is controversial because there are no one-size-fits-all solutions. And I think historically we kind of had two narratives here. One was kind of the Washington consensus, the belief that if countries in the global south and in Eastern Europe and around the world want to develop, want to reach the highest level of develop, they have to build institutions like the most developed country in the world, which is the US. That was pushed by the, we all know, by the World Bank and IMF from the 1980s. That was problematic in at least two ways. First of all, liberalized markets, liberalized financial markets need very, very strong institutions in terms of financial regulation, in terms of rules of law, rule of law, etc. Institutions that would first needed to build in countries of the global south, in developing countries, to work probably for the financial markets to work properly. And then, of course, the global financial crisis has demonstrated that that is sometimes actually also not working in the US, right? Financial, even in the US, institutions are not good enough to completely prevent financial crisis. And the second, and in my opinion, unfortunately, much weaker narrative is that the global south should look at successful developers in East Asia. And I think, again, this is part of the TPSD mission. And we have excellent experts here from Korea that know much, much more about Korean historical development than me. And I do think it's still fascinating to study this, the Korean development example, but also, of course, Taiwan, China, etc. What has Korea done since the 1960s? And I don't believe it's about leaders. I don't think it's about Park Chung-hee or Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, about the, whatever, smart or whatever leaders. But rather we need to look at what have they actually done, what institutions, what actually, as Alice Amsden called it, the good enough institutions to build for mediocre bureaucrats and leaders to develop. And I think to maintain financial stability, to channel large amounts of international finance into the country while maintaining country ownership and financial stability. And I think key here were domestic development banks and strict control of international financial flows. And of course, I'm not saying, yes, I'm almost done. I'm not saying, of course, that this is a kind of a role model for others, but I think it's something to study. It's an inspiration. There are a lot of lessons to be learned. And I think international organizations, including the GCF and the UN, need to include this kind of historical experience much more into their operation. Learn how, for example, Korea built up development banks and then help countries in the global south to do the same. And this is what I would call kind of soft infrastructure for implementing these, bringing these global goals to the domestic level around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kalinowski. And last but by no means least, we have Professor Yeomin Yoon.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm very honored to be here at Stanford. Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to develop a resilience environment for sustainable water future. In particular, I'm going to talk about contaminant of emerging concern. Let's see what environmental engineering is. I'm an environmental engineer. Then you'd be curious what environmental engineers are doing. Let me ask you something. What would you need for your life? Somebody would say money, jobs, family, love, friend, and others, or maybe correct. In terms of environmental engineering, let me ask you something else. Can we live without clean air, without clean water, without clean soil? Let's assume there is no municipal solid waste pickup systems. So we, all environmental engineers, are making our healthy, safe environment for future good life. Because there are lots of environmental risk and loss of disability-free days, mainly due to unsafe water, indoor air pollution. Some countries, they are still pumping gasolines having lead. There are lots of urban air pollutions. Okay, let's see. I believe everybody is to be a smarter than fifth grader. Do you know what the population we just reached this year? You said 8.8 billion, right? 8.1 billion. For last 1 century, we can say the population has been exponentially increasing. With the increasing population, what would it need? We would need a lot of resources. Probably money, food, energy, water, and etc. I'm a water person. Let's say the estimated use of water for the last couple of decades, between 1950 and 1980, the amount of water we used was increasing with the more likely increasing population. However, it's kind of constant after that. It's because people considered how to reduce or conservative the use of amount of water. Do you know how much water do you need or we use per person per day, every day? A lot. How much water do you drink every day? 2 liters, about. But here in the US, we have used around 150 gallons per day. It's a lot compared to other countries like Japan or Korea. They have used around 100 gallons per person per day. So, how about in very extreme environment, like space shuttles? I was able to learn how much one astronaut needed, the amount of water. They needed around less than 3 gallons per day, 2 liters for drinking, some others for cleaning, flushing, washing, which means once we have to reduce or some extreme environment, we should be able to reduce the amount of water. For example, here they have to recycle the wastewater for their mission to Mars. Have you seen the movie Mission to Mars? Back in 1997, 8. Okay, probably this time to go back to and watch some movies. Okay, let's say water availability. There are different amount of water availability environment depending on continent, countries, and cities. Here in North, Central, and South America, we have a lot better water availability environment compared to Europe, Africa, and Asia. Particularly, the Asia, 6% of the world population live in Asia. The continent has only 36% of world water resources. which means once you have water shortage, scarcity issues, what should they do? They are thinking about how to recycle water, reclaim wastewater, because again, lots of people, 1.1 billion people, do not have access to clean, improved drinking water. And also with the increasing population next decade, we can expect more water demand. Let's talk about reclaimed wastewater. Based on technologies we have, we should be able to make clean water with the wastewater. However, people do not feel comfortable to drink reclaimed wastewater. So more likely we have used the reclaimed wastewater for different purposes, non-potable purposes, like toilet flushing, golf course, irrigation, car wash, and etc. For drinking water, let's take a look at how many contaminants are in drinking water regulations. By here in the US EPA, around 100 chemicals and microbes are in drinking water regulations, while around 100 different chemicals and contaminant candidate list, which means many of other contaminant chemicals are not in drinking water regulations, while there are over 100,000 chemicals out there, water, air, and soil. Every day, pharmaceutical companies, they try to make 200 or 300 new chemicals. Some of them would be commercially available years later. Okay, let's take a look at contaminant of emerging concern, particularly endocrine disrupting compound, pharmaceuticals, and personal care products. Lots of studies have shown that EDC PPCPs have been found in wastewater influent, effluent, and drinking water sources, even finished drinking water. And also, there are lots of toxicological studies showing that, for example, some male fish have been feminized in the presence of certain types of endocrine disrupting compound. We think pharmaceuticals and personal care products we have used on a daily basis, those are safe. It can be toxic based on current toxicological studies. So, again, we are talking about contaminant of emerging concern. There are lots of EDC PPCP occurrence studies, different continents, different countries, different cities. I was able to be involved in one of the earliest EDC PPCP occurrence study in South Korea. We took some samples from the Han River that's passing through the middle of Seoul, upstream, middle stream, and downstream. There are 4 major creeks. We took some samples, and also there are 11 major wastewater treatment plants. We took some samples to take a look at 30 plus EDC PPCP compound. Many of them were detected at different concentrations, but some of them were detected relatively high concentrations, up to 17 nanograms per liter, which is iopropamide X-ray contrast media. That indicates that at the time, hospital wastewater may not be properly treated. There are lots of EDC PPCP occurrence studies. One of the most comprehensive one came out by USGS here in the US. They look at over 1,100 different sites from 46 different states, looking at 21 hormones and 103 pharmaceuticals. Those sites are influenced by agricultural, industrial, and municipal wastewaters. Dr. Shane Snyder and his group, they did a very comprehensive study to look at EDC PPCP occurrence from 19 different participating water treatment plants based on conventional and advanced treatment technologies. They found, based on 62 different target contaminants and different categories, 21 chemicals were detected in raw water. These are the main chemicals from different categories more frequently found and detected: antibiotics, pharmaceuticals, painkillers, TCP, fire retardants, and nitrogen, pesticide, and some others. More importantly, they found also 11 different chemicals detected in finished drinking water. So my current research is working on advanced water treatment and wastewater treatment reuse with the membrane adsorption and also oxidation to remove contaminant of emerging concern. To improve the treatment efficiencies, we have adopted nanotechnologies different nanomaterials like graphene oxide, carbon nanotubes, metal organic frameworks, and MXene, and some others. The question we have, do we have to focus on advanced treatment purification technologies only? Of course, high-tech is very effective to remove contaminant or emerging concern. However, there are some limitations because advanced treatment purification technologies requires high cost, complexity, and also it requires high energy infrastructure requirements and some others. How about developing world? There are lots of water challenges and concerns, such as lots of people, they do not have access to clean drinking water. And also for developing world, there are lots of poor sanitations, waterborne disease, and also they have used the water for agricultural purpose more likely. And also some challenges. As you have known, there are lots of challenges such as climate change, population growth, and also limited funding. Somebody mentioned geopolitical issues a lot. That's why I would like to propose dual-track solutions for sustainable water future. Because developed countries like US, UK, or European countries, drinking water regulations are getting more strict over years. So we still have to focus on advanced treatment technologies. However, for developing world, we have to develop cost-effective technologies such as boiling, solar disinfection, chlorination, slow sand filtration, and somebody mentioned some education and awareness. So this is what I have today. I would like to acknowledge some funding agencies and my past current researchers, postdocs, some PhD, master, graduate students, and many others. This is it. Okay, thank you. I was trying to finish within 10 minutes. That's why I got mission from the moderator.
You did very well indeed. Thank you very much, Professor Yoon. So as our panelists have all stuck pretty much to time, we do have time for Q&A. But while you're gathering your thoughts, I thought I'd try to pull together some common themes that we've discovered in these panel presentations. And I think the first one is that we need to think outside the traditional box, that a lot of what's being proposed here does not fit into the solutions that are generally proposed for sustainable development challenges, especially in terms of challenges to the universal aspirations of solutions. That I think we've had proposals here for maybe an East Asian way of doing things that may fit the challenges in this region better. Secondly, the idea that we need to look at non-traditional security and development cooperation at the level of minilateralism. At the moment, most minilaterals are minilateral cooperation as opposed to multilateral, maxilateral cooperation is where you have 3 to 5 countries involved in cooperation. But usually you have a great power being backed up by some of their closest allies looking at traditional security cooperation. Now, Professor Easley mentioned the importance of a third way being provided by middle powers, but how are these middle powers going to cooperate so that they're not dominated by the interests of great powers? A third important theme, I think, is human centering, especially when we're looking at technological innovation and cooperation and infrastructure, that our measurements of success must be carried out at the level of vulnerable individuals and groups, rather than the gross data of GNI per capita or GDP per capita, especially if we're looking at women and children and also minorities and the way they are impacted sometimes by the forces of development. We talked about hydroelectric dams and what a great boon they've been in terms of renewables. But who's relocated for the hydroelectric dams? It's the most vulnerable groups usually. We also, I think, have uncovered the need for new thinking on implementation problems. And where do these ideas come from? Do we just rely on the received wisdom of the neoliberal project? And I think, again, there's a consensus in this panel that we need to think beyond this. So maybe we need to look at regional commissions rather than global commissions, non-traditional security or developmental minilaterals led by middle powers or at least secondary powers that are not dominated by great powers. So those are just a few common themes that I found in these presentations. And now I will open it up to, you've all had time to think and raise some questions. So we have 2 live mics there. Please make your way to one of the mics to ask any questions of the panel. First of all, identifying who you are and to whom you would like to ask the question. Well, if no one's going to charge towards the mics, then I will turn my comments over to our panel and ask what their responses might be to some of my thematic conclusions.
I would associate myself with many of your points, although, of course, I think one of the sets of trade-offs that governments and international organizations face is when striving to make progress on and eventually meet the goals as ambitious as the SDGs, there is a balance between perhaps minilateral and regional and even national initiatives and having a more global perspective with global standards and global coordination. And there could be some, as you alluded to, trade-offs in terms of localization and fit to local needs and conditions, and global efficiency, and frankly, international pressure for meeting goals and adhering to certain standards, because ultimately, so many of these issues, not just global economic and financial stability, supply chain security, but issues of our climate and non-traditional human security are globally interconnected. And so I think while I would associate myself with, let's be more creative, let's get outside the box for working with minilaterals, for example, the global initiatives are still very important. I remember yesterday someone panned international conferences. We need less international conferences, more implementation. I think we need both to have the coordination, to have the implementation, to have the tailored solutions. And I would just give an example that I only briefly mentioned in my remarks. That's this Blue Dot Network certification. When you have a globally recognized set of standards for infrastructure, and this can be certified by expert actors, and this can be sort of with a stamp of approval by experts and a list housed at the OECD, for example. When you have that sort of standard, high standard of accreditation, then you can start to address some of the problems that Professor Kalinowski mentioned in terms of attracting capital. It's like this is not just a national project that has a political push under the current administration and the national budget. This is something with a business model. This is something that has credible metrics for sustainability, and it's something that's worthy of a broader set of funders to invest in and realize. So I think while the local solutions and learning from local lessons and coming up with creative geometries of cooperation regionally is extremely important, I think the international standards and coordination will remain very important as well.
Well, thank you for that. Professor Jung, I just want to press you on one issue. You're talking about the missing women and why, obviously, normatively, we should care. But I think you could develop further why it's important from a practical reason, because women are often the first responders in times of DRR. They're often civil society leaders and NGO leaders. They've made a tremendous contribution to peace building. So I think this would further reinforce your argument for why we should care about missing women. Maybe you could speak a little to that.
So obviously this is a normal, just the obvious norm to have the women and the men have the equal power to do something. But as an economist, the economists always think about the effectiveness, and we always care about the efficiency. So in terms of efficiency, we also investigated how the women empowerment is good for economic development, and we have found the mounting and the numerous empirical evidences that the women empowerment is really good for economic development. So as the Dean Howe said, several cases kind of the women can be the first responders to the natural disasters, and again, they can be good political leaders that can have more influence to invest in more the community-driven, the public good investment like waters or child health care or so. And it is not just normative arguments here. So as an economist, we argue that women empowerment is actually good for economic development, and there are tons of empirical evidences that you can find everywhere. So, yeah.
Professor Kalinowski, in what ways do you think that East Asian models or examples or instances of cooperation have a comparative advantage over the universalist perspective, shall we say?
Well, I think they have a very strong relevance, and I also absolutely agree with what you said. We need to kind of think outside the box, because the box is an American box. It's a US box in which we're seeing the world through the lens when we talk about development, including, I think, at this conference, mostly we see it from the American perspective, particularly when it's about issues of financing, public-private partnerships. I've been talking about today in this morning's panel, and that is understandable because the US, that's where the money is, right? That's where the money is managed, and that's also where the research on development and finance is done. So we do see but I think we always have to remind ourselves that, the US is very special. And I mean, here, I think Silicon Valley, so institutions that work in the US don't work in developing countries. And they don't often work in Europe or Korea or Japan. And I think financing mechanisms that work very well in Silicon Valley, they don't even work in other places in the US, right? So it is, so the US case is really very, very special. The US is really an outlier, very idiosyncratic. So I think the advantage of the East Asian, to put it very simple, I think the East Asians development solutions are much simpler, much easier. The institutions are much easier. It's much easier to as I mentioned, for example, capital controls, controlling the in and outflow of capital, that very much simplifies the way your banks and financial system works. So that makes things much more simple. A bank having development banks that are controlled or at least partly controlled by the state, using them to channel global funds to the domestic level, again, very much simplifies the way financing mechanisms work. Whenever the private sector, in my opinion, comes in, and I'm not, absolutely not, I think we need the private sector, for sure. I'm not against that at all. But I think also, I mean, we're in a dialogue here, right? And a dialogue is always best when we have like common goals, but we have also different solutions. And I think in many ways, the East Asian solutions are much, much more practical and easier for the developing world compared to the very complex US ones.
Professor Yoon, it struck me in your presentation that you seem very much to take a basic human needs approach to development. So feel free to expand on that or respond to anything that's gone before.
Okay. Yeah, you know what? Okay, again, I'm a water person, so we are here for energy, CO2 reductions. What we can connect, the way we are doing to effectively remove the contaminant with low energy to produce more water, it can save energy to reduce the amount of water, CO2 production. So they are all related. Even though, again, I'm a water person, but still the way we are doing it is all connected. That's what I can say. And also, think about, there are lots of chemicals I mentioned, over 100,000 chemicals out there. Okay, 100 chemicals are in drinking water regulation. There are about 100 different chemicals in contaminant candidate list. The contaminant candidate list set the first time back in 1998, and then we have still about 100 chemicals. To move one chemicals from contaminant candidate list to real drinking water regulation, we just got one chemicals from here to here. It took about 26 years, which means there are over 100 chemicals in contaminant candidate list, over 100,000 chemicals out there. You never know which one would be in contaminant candidate list. So there are lots of ways to go, but still, meanwhile, again, to reduce the CO2 production, to save energy, that's why we are still doing it to not only for developed countries, but also, as I mentioned, for developing world. That's what I can say.
Thank you. Actually, that links back to what I initially stated about the Lao case, is that the negative impacts on development can last a really long time. So we're looking at long-term trends, but also the cleanup can take a really long time. So there are no quick fixes. And I think that's another problem that sometimes we face. We were talking yesterday about how hard it's been to meet these targets. And I think that's part of the problem, that we do tend to focus on short-termism, and we need to develop a longer-term focus. I've just been shown a sign that we have 2 minutes left. Has anyone come up with a question that they'd like to ask any of us up on the stage here?
I know that Professor Yoon has not been so wedded into the SDGs, but considering that you were here since yesterday, I wonder if going on from here on, that you would work with us who have been working on SDGs to, because I think the research that you've been doing on clean water is very much in sync with the
Okay, I think that's a good point, President Kim. Yes.
So I hope the panelists after this will find ways to do more interdisciplinary work.
Definitely, you know what? Okay, I think we are becoming good friends. You know, once we go back to Korea, beers, dinners. We can see often, and also President Kim. This is your last term. We'll be happy to see you joining us for beers, dinners next year. So.
Well, I'd like to thank all our panelists for their excellent presentations, and feel free to engage us in conversations. If you're a little shy now, we're going to be around for the rest of the day, so do grab us at lunch or afterwards. So thank you all once again.